The world moved fast outside her window, cars honking, people rushing past, all chasing something unseen, but inside the dim apartment above the corner laundromat, time had slowed into something brittle and sharp. 9-year-old Eliza crouched on the threadbare carpet, tying her brother's 2 small shoes with fingers that trembled from more than the morning chill. No breakfast today. Again, she had tried to stretch the last loaf of bread, soaking the stale end in warm water to make it soft enough for Toby to chew. He never complained. 4 years old and already too used to going without. "Mama's still sleeping," he whispered, standing awkwardly as Eliza double-knotted his laces. Eliza nodded without answering. Their mother hadn't stirred since yesterday morning. Her breathing had been raspy, her forehead too warm, but they couldn't afford another ambulance ride. Not after the last time, when they'd waited in the ER for hours and left with nothing but a bottle of pills and a hospital bill folded into Eliza's backpack like a time bomb. She glanced toward the bedroom door, still closed. They couldn't wait anymore. Toby needed food, and Eliza, tired, cold, and far too small for the weight she carried, knew what she had to do. She reached for the box under the couch cushion. Inside, wrapped in the sleeve of one of Mama's old sweaters, was the bracelet. Gold, delicate, with a tiny sapphire set in the clasp. Their mother had once told her it was a gift from someone who used to matter. "It's worth something," Mama had said, voice thick with sleep and memory, "but don't sell it. Not unless you have to." Eliza had promised, but promises didn't feed little brothers. She kissed Toby's forehead and tugged her sweatshirt sleeves over her cold hands. "Come on," she said softly, "let's go for a walk." Down the steps past the landlord's office, where the rent overdue notices were piling up like dead leaves, out into the pale morning light, where the sidewalk gleamed with last night's rain. The city smelled of exhaust and roasted nuts, and something sour she couldn't name. They walked 2 blocks before Eliza saw him, a man in a slate gray suit, stepping from a black car, phone to his ear, sharp lines, pressed clothes, hair combed with a kind of effortless precision she associated with people who had never eaten dinner from a vending machine. He looked important, busy, rich. She stepped into his path. "Sir," she said, holding up the bracelet in her open hand, "please, my brother's hungry. This is all we have." The man looked down, confusion tightening his brow. For a moment, he didn't speak, and then he reached for the bracelet like it was a ghost from his past. Miles Carter wasn't in the habit of noticing people on his morning commute. Not really. His driver knew the route well enough to avoid the worst of the traffic, and by the time the car pulled up to the curb of his building, Miles was already halfway into his schedule, eyes flicking across the glowing screen in his palm like a man trying to outrun time. This morning had started no differently. Conference call at 9, shareholder prep at 11, a private lunch with the CFO, the usual quiet panic in his chest that told him he wasn't doing enough, even when he was doing everything. He stepped out of the car and into the crisp morning air, the high glass tower of Carter and Lane casting a long shadow over the pavement. His reflection shimmered faintly in the mirrored windows, tall, composed, wrapped in charcoal wool and guarded efficiency. His shoes clicked softly on the sidewalk, a sound he barely registered anymore. Then he heard a voice, "Sir," not demanding, not desperate, just steady, like it had practiced the word 1,000 times before saying it aloud. He looked up, and the world shifted. 2 children stood just beyond the concrete planter that edged the building. The girl, no more than 9 or 10, held her chin up in a way that reminded him, absurdly, of boardroom poise. Her sweatshirt was stretched at the sleeves, her skirt worn thin at the hem, and she was barefoot, standing straight in spite of it. Next to her, a boy half her size clutched the edge of her sleeve, his eyes too large for his face. She opened her hand. A gold bracelet lay there, gleaming in the sunlight like it didn't belong in this version of the city. "My brother's hungry," she said again, voice just above a whisper now. "This is all we have." Miles stared at the bracelet. Something in his chest froze. The weight, the shape, the soft glint of sapphire embedded in the clasp. He had seen this before, held it, fastened it onto someone's wrist, with fingers trembling, not from cold but from love. Years ago, he reached out, almost without thinking, and the girl let the bracelet rest in his palm. He turned it slowly. The engraving caught the light. "Time owes us nothing." It hit him like thunder. 7 years ago, he'd given this to a woman with wind in her hair and fire in her eyes. A woman who had vanished before he could ask her to stay. Now it was here, in the hand of a girl who looked just enough like her that something unspoken twisted deep in his gut. He looked into the girl's eyes, wide, guarded, blue, and felt the scaffolding of his day, his plans, his sense of self, all begin to sway. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice a stranger's. She didn't blink. "It was my mom's." For a few long seconds Miles couldn't speak. The noise of the city dimmed behind him, muffled horns, the distant rumble of trains underground, a man shouting into his phone near the corner, and all he could see was the girl and the bracelet she'd placed in his hand. He looked down again, tracing the engraving with his thumb. "Time owes us nothing." He remembered the night he gave it to her, Lena. She'd laughed, soft and surprised, when she read the inscription. She had kissed him like she believed time might owe them something after all. And then, weeks later, she was gone. He'd searched, briefly, frantically, then slowly convinced himself that she'd made a choice. A clean break. A chapter closed. But the girl in front of him now had her mouth, her jawline, the same way of standing still like she was bracing against wind. No one else could feel. "What's your name?" he asked, gently now. "Eliza," she answered, watching his every move. "And this is Toby." The boy peeked out from behind her sleeve, one hand still curled into a fist around the edge of her sweatshirt. His eyes were the same washed sky blue as Miles's own. There was a smudge of dirt on his cheek, and when Miles met his gaze, the boy didn't flinch. He simply looked tired. "Where's your mom?" Miles asked, already fearing the answer. Eliza's lips parted, but she didn't look away. "She's sick, at the clinic on 9th. They won't let us stay. Said she needed rest. We've been waiting." Her voice didn't waver. It wasn't pride he heard in her tone. It was experience, like she had already rehearsed this conversation in her mind, prepared for disbelief. Miles turned his gaze from the bracelet to the sidewalk, then to the glass doors of his office building just yards away. His life was waiting for him behind them. Charts, metrics, deals, all of it suddenly felt made of paper. He looked back at Eliza and Toby. Neither child moved. They didn't beg, didn't plead, just stood there, so still in the chaos of the morning rush that people flowed around them like water around stone. Something inside him gave way. He slipped the bracelet into his pocket and knelt to their level, the sharp creases of his suit folding awkwardly at the knees. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said quietly. Eliza straightened. "We're not asking for anything." "I know," he hesitated, "but maybe I can still give you something." Toby looked up at Eliza, his fingers tightening around hers. She looked at Miles for a moment longer, then gave a single careful nod. He stood and gestured toward the corner cafe, just across the street. "Let's get you both something warm. No strings. Just breakfast." For the first time, Eliza's shoulders loosened, just slightly. She turned toward the cafe, and Miles followed, his day forgotten. The cafe was quiet inside, warmed by the low hum of conversation and the scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon. Miles guided them to a corner booth away from the windows, instinctively choosing the most private spot. Eliza slid in first, Toby beside her, still holding her hand. Miles took the seat across from them, the vinyl cushion cold through his suit pants. The server, a young woman with her hair tied up in a red scarf, approached with a friendly smile that faltered slightly when she saw the children's worn clothes and bare feet. Miles didn't give her time to wonder. He ordered quickly, pancakes, eggs, toast, juice, fruit, adding more than they could possibly eat. Something about the idea of leaving them wanting made his throat feel too tight. As the waitress left, Eliza sat stiffly, her gaze sweeping the cafe like she expected someone to drag them out. Toby leaned against her, small hands resting on the table, eyes glassy with fatigue. He hadn't said a word since they'd entered. "You're safe here," Miles said quietly, unsure if he was trying to convince them or himself. Eliza glanced at him, but said nothing. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the familiar curve of the bracelet. Slowly he pulled it out and placed it on the table between them. "You said this was your mother's," he said, voice steady. "Do you know where she got it?" Eliza looked at it for a long moment. "She said someone gave it to her, a long time ago, before I was born." Miles nodded, his chest aching with memories. Lena had worn it everywhere. He remembered watching her run her thumb across the engraving when she thought he wasn't looking. She never told him she was pregnant. She just vanished. The bracelet caught the morning light and glowed. Toby reached for it, then paused. "It's Mama's," he whispered. Eliza gently pushed his hand back and shook her head. "Not anymore. We gave it away." "No," Miles said softly. "You didn't. You gave it to someone who already loved it." She blinked at him, unsure what he meant, and he let the silence stretch. The food arrived a minute later, and for a beat neither child moved. Eliza looked at the plates like they were a trap. Then slowly, cautiously, she tore a piece of toast and passed it to Toby. He took it with both hands and began eating, careful and quiet. When Eliza finally picked up her fork, Miles felt something unspool inside him. This wasn't charity, it was recognition, of blood, of history, of responsibility long delayed. He watched her eat and thought of the woman he once loved, and the daughter he might already have been looking at. Eliza ate in small measured bites, like someone who'd learned food could disappear without warning. She never took more than half a piece of toast at a time, always offering it to Toby first. The boy ate hungrily, cheeks puffed with pancakes, syrup glistening at the corner of his mouth, but even he seemed careful, quiet. Miles didn't touch his own coffee, he only watched. Everything about them stirred memories he hadn't let himself revisit in years. The night Lena had laughed with her shoes in her hand, running barefoot down a rain-slicked street, bracelet glinting on her wrist, the way she kissed him like they had forever. He had been on the edge of asking her to stay, but he hadn't. Now here they were, the children she'd never told him about, one of them possibly his. He studied Eliza's face, the way her brow furrowed slightly as she buttered a piece of toast for her brother, the curve of her cheek, the angle of her jaw. So much like Lena, but there were traces of him too. His eyes, his silence. When they'd eaten enough that the frantic edge of hunger softened, Miles leaned forward slightly. "Do you have somewhere to go after this?" Eliza hesitated. "We were going to the hospital, to see if Mama," she swallowed, "to see if anything changed." He nodded. "And if they don't let you stay?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her water, her hand trembling just enough for him to notice. "You've been sleeping outside?" he asked gently. "Mostly behind buildings," she said. "Matter of fact, sometimes near the laundromat. Once the store lady let us sleep in the back, but only for a night." Toby had stopped eating. He leaned against her, eyes fluttering closed. Children shouldn't speak like this, he thought. They shouldn't know how to survive. "I have a place," he said quietly. "A hotel not far from here. Warm, clean, safe. You could rest there. Just for today." Eliza narrowed her eyes, not angry, just cautious, like a girl who had heard too many promises fall apart. "Why?" she asked, voice low. He looked at her honestly. "Because I think your mother meant something to me, and maybe you do too." She didn't respond, but she didn't say no. That was enough. Miles stood and helped Toby slide from the booth, carrying him as the boy dozed against his shoulder. Eliza followed slowly, her small fingers brushing the edge of the table before turning away. Outside, the city was still rushing, horns, heels, conversations that never paused. But for a moment, the world slowed again, and three people who hadn't known they belonged to each other walked together towards something none of them could name yet, but somehow all needed. The hotel was quiet, a mid-tier place tucked between a pharmacy and a wine bar, modest enough not to raise eyebrows, but warm enough to feel like a world apart from the street. Miles led them through the revolving doors, past the bored clerk at the front desk, and straight to the elevator. Eliza didn't say anything as they ascended, but she stood close, her body half turned toward Toby in Miles's arms, like she needed to see him breathing. Her shoes, borrowed from a bin at the clinic, were too big, and one slipped halfway off as the elevator dinged softly and opened. The suite was simple, 2 bedrooms, a kitchenette, and a small living area with worn armchairs and a table stacked with room service menus. Clean linens, soft lighting, safe. Miles stepped aside to let Eliza enter first. She stood just inside the door for a moment, as if expecting the walls to vanish. Then she walked forward in cautious circles, her eyes scanning every corner. Toby stirred, and Miles gently laid him on the nearest bed, pulling a throw blanket over his shoulders. The boy didn't wake, only curled deeper into sleep, mouth parted slightly, breath even. "Is this your place?" Eliza asked quietly. Miles shook his head. "I live across town. This is just somewhere quiet. Thought you might rest better here." She nodded, still standing, her arms crossed tight over her stomach. "You don't have to sleep here if it doesn't feel right," he added, "but I'd like you to stay. Just for tonight, until we figure out what comes next." Eliza walked to the window. It overlooked a narrow courtyard, the light falling soft and golden on brick walls, and a few pots of flowers on distant ledges. She placed her hand on the glass. "What do you want from us?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "Nothing. I think I might know who your mom is, or was." "Lena." She turned toward him so quickly, that her braid whipped across her shoulder. "That's her name," she whispered. He stepped carefully toward the table and took the bracelet from his coat pocket, placing it between them again. "I gave her this years ago." Eliza's eyes flicked to it, then back to his face. "Did she know you were rich?" Miles smiled, a sad, worn smile. "No, I wasn't, not back then." Silence settled between them. "I think I'm your father," he said. Finally, the words landed like something too heavy to lift. Eliza didn't cry, she didn't gasp, she just looked at him, long, deep, the kind of look that measured what was said against the weight of what had been lived. And then she asked, almost inaudibly, "Are you going to disappear again?" Miles stepped closer, crouching so they were eye level. "No," he said. "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." She nodded slowly, no smile, but she didn't back away, and that, he knew, was the beginning of belief. That night, the suite was quiet but not empty, the kind of silence that felt like a held breath, like the pause between a question and its answer. Eliza sat cross-legged on the far bed, her knees drawn up, arms around them. She hadn't taken off her oversized shoes. She didn't ask for pajamas. She didn't ask for anything at all. Toby slept deeply in the bed beside her, the kind of sleep that only came after too many nights without it. His little body was sprawled sideways, one hand tucked under his cheek, his mouth slightly open. Eliza kept glancing at him, counting his breaths like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Miles stood in the kitchenette, hands wrapped around a mug of tea he hadn't tasted. The city lights outside painted shifting patterns across the floor. He didn't know what he was doing. He only knew that he couldn't send them back out there. He called the front desk and arranged for clean clothes, soft pajamas, socks, a toothbrush. The manager asked no questions. Discretion was something money still bought easily. When he returned to the room with a small bundle of essentials, Eliza watched him warily. "These are for you," he said, setting them on the bed's edge. "If you want." She didn't move at first. Then slowly, she reached for the items. The toothbrush, the folded nightshirt, the warm socks with little rubber grips on the bottom. She held them like they might vanish if she blinked. Miles took a step back, giving her space. "I'll sit over there," he said, gesturing to the armchair near the window, "so you and Toby can sleep." "You're not leaving?" she asked, the words falling out before she could stop them. "No," he said, "not tonight, not tomorrow either." She nodded once and stood. She carried the clothes into the bathroom and closed the door behind her. He could hear the faint sound of running water, the tap of the toothbrush against porcelain. It was the most ordinary sound in the world, but to him it felt sacred. A small return to dignity. When she came out, her hair damp around her face, and her feet in the two big socks, she didn't speak. She simply climbed into bed, beside Toby, pulling the blanket up to their chins. Miles dimmed the lights, and took his place in the armchair. He wasn't tired, but his body ached with the kind of exhaustion that didn't come from work. After a few minutes, Eliza's voice came soft from the shadows. "He cries in his sleep, sometimes. I'll be here if he does," Miles said, just as soft, and she didn't answer, but she didn't cry either. She just closed her eyes, one hand on her brother's shoulder, and let herself rest. Miles watched them until sleep took him, still wearing his suit. For the first time in years, the silence in his chest felt like peace, instead of emptiness. Morning light spilled into the room like a quiet visitor, soft and golden and warm across the floor. Eliza stirred first. She blinked against the brightness, unsure at first where she was. The bed under her was too soft. The air didn't carry the sour chill of concrete or cold tile, and Toby was still beside her, sleeping soundly, not shivering, not clinging to her out of fear. For a full minute she didn't move. She just breathed. Then she sat up slowly, brushing her hair back from her face. Across the room, Miles was already awake. He sat at the round table by the kitchenette, a mug of tea in front of him and a stack of papers beside it. He hadn't shaved. He looked a little wrinkled, a little tired, a little human. "You stayed," she said quietly. He looked up, smiling faintly. "I told you I would." She glanced down at Toby, still sleeping, then crossed the room barefoot. The carpet was warm beneath her toes. She slid into the chair across from him, her small hands folded in her lap. Miles reached for the papers, then hesitated. "I was on the phone with the hospital this morning," he said gently. "Your mom's condition is stable, but she hasn't woken up yet." Eliza nodded, her face unreadable. "They said you can visit again today, if you want." She looked down. "They don't always let us in." "I'll go with you," he said. "They'll let you in this time." Silence stretched for a moment. Then she asked, Did you love her? The question caught him off guard, but he didn't lie. Yes, he said, I did, very much. Eliza didn't look surprised, just sad. She used to talk about you, she said softly, but not like a story, more like a missing piece. He exhaled. She never told me about you, or Toby. She said she didn't know how to find you, that maybe you wouldn't want to be found. The words struck him harder than he expected. I would have come, he said, almost a whisper. If I'd known, I would have run through every street in this city to find you both. Eliza studied him, not with hope or fear, but with the eyes of someone deciding whether to let a door stay open. After a moment, she reached into the pocket of her nightshirt and pulled out the bracelet. It lay curled in her palm like something sacred. She always kept this close, she said, even when we had nothing. Miles swallowed hard. He reached out careful and slow and closed his fingers gently over hers. I'll keep it close now, he said, if that's okay. She nodded, and though she didn't smile, the line of her shoulders softened. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of a story that hadn't been told, until now. By midday they were back at the hospital. The lobby was bright and cold, its polished floors gleaming under rows of fluorescent lights. Eliza stood just inside the automatic doors, her hand tucked tight into Miles's, her other arm wrapped around Toby, who clung to her like a shadow. No one stopped them this time. No sideways glances, no gentle refusals from nurses, not when Miles Carter was beside them, speaking calmly at the reception desk, offering credentials and quiet authority like it was part of his breath. They were led to the ICU by a nurse, with kind eyes. Eliza didn't speak on the way up. Toby's steps were slow and dragging. The elevator ride felt too fast. When they entered the room, Eliza froze. Her mother lay still under pale sheets, machines whispering beside her bed, the rhythm of a heartbeat tapping steadily into the silence. Tubes ran from her arms. Her lips were dry. Her eyes were closed. Eliza took one step forward, then another, until she was at the edge of the bed. She climbed carefully into the visitor's chair and reached for her mother's hand, careful not to tug on the IV. She's warm, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Toby reached up, trying to climb into Eliza's lap. Miles helped lift him gently, setting him down beside her. The boy touched Lena's wrist with his small fingers, then rested his head against Eliza's side. Miles stayed back at first, unsure where he belonged in that room. He watched the way Eliza's thumb rubbed over her mother's knuckles, the way her eyes flicked constantly toward Lena's face, waiting for a flutter, a twitch, any sign of life. I talk to her sometimes, Eliza said suddenly, her voice soft but steady. Even when she doesn't answer, she hears you, Miles said, crossing to the other side of the bed. You don't know that. He looked at Lena's face, pale and still but not lifeless. I don't, but I believe it. For a long time they didn't speak. Eliza hummed something under her breath, a lullaby maybe, or a song she made up. Toby slowly fell asleep against her. The sun shifted across the windowsill. Eventually, Eliza looked up at him. If she doesn't wake up, what happens to us? Miles knelt beside her. Then I'll still be here, he said. I'll fight for you. I'll make sure you have a home, no matter what. She looked at him carefully, searching for the cracks in his words, for the kind of emptiness that grown-ups sometimes tried to hide behind promises. Even Toby? She asked. He reached across the bed, covering both of Lena's hands with his own, especially Toby. Eliza didn't speak again, but she leaned forward, brushing her mother's hair from her forehead, and Miles saw it then. Not just grief in her eyes, but something else too. A flicker of belief. Small, fragile, but alive. The next morning, the sky wore a soft gray hush. Rain tapped lightly against the window of the hotel suite, the kind that made the world feel slower, gentler. Eliza sat at the small table in the corner, her hands wrapped around a mug of warm milk. She wasn't drinking it, just holding it close, like it could anchor her. Miles stood by the window, watching the drops trail down the glass, his thoughts far from the quiet room. He had barely slept. The night before, after Eliza and Toby had fallen asleep, he'd called a lawyer he trusted, someone who had helped him with company acquisitions and personal affairs alike. The man had been cautious, but understanding. Guardianship was possible, likely even, given Lena's condition and the lack of any other known family, but it would take time, proof, patience, and heart. Miles was prepared to give all four. Now, as the rain fell in gentle patterns, Eliza finally spoke. She used to work at a bakery, she said, when I was little, before Toby. Miles turned. Did she like it? She loved the smell of bread. She said it made her feel like the world was still good. He sat across from her, his own tea cooling untouched. Did she ever talk about, before that, before you were born? Eliza hesitated, then nodded. She had a picture once, you were in it, but she said she lost it during a move. Miles's heart thudded. She kept a picture of me. Yeah, said you were the best thing that almost stayed. The words landed like a quiet stone in his chest. I should have tried harder to find her, he said, more to himself than to her. Eliza shrugged, a small motion heavy, with too much understanding. People get lost, that's what she always said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the bracelet again, turning it over in his hands. I want to take this to her, he said, to remind her what mattered, just in case. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Eliza stood and walked to his side. She looked at the bracelet, then at him. Her voice was soft. Okay. Later that afternoon, they returned to the hospital. The same nurse met them at the door, her smile kinder now, her movements gentler. The room looked unchanged, machines blinking, air still, but something felt different. Miles stepped to the bedside. He took Lena's hand and placed the bracelet gently in her palm. Her skin was dry and cool. The gold shimmered faintly in the dim light. You still have people here, he whispered. You're not alone. You never were. Eliza stood by the window with Toby in her arms, watching, waiting, and in that fragile silence, something shifted. Not a miracle, not yet, but a beginning. The room was hushed, as if the machines themselves were listening. Miles sat at Lena's bedside, her hand resting in his. He had barely moved since placing the bracelet there, the weight of it a silent promise. On the other side of the room, Eliza sat in the visitor's chair, cradling Toby, who had long since drifted off, cheek pressed against her shoulder. The rhythm of the monitors was steady, comforting, but it was the stillness that gnawed at them. I've been thinking, Eliza said softly, watching her mother's face, about what I'll say if she wakes up. Miles turned, listening. I want to tell her it's okay, she continued, that we're okay, even though we weren't for a while. Miles nodded slowly. She'd want to hear that. Eliza looked at Lena, her voice a whisper now. And I want to tell her you found us. At that, something caught in Miles's throat. He turned back toward Lena, studying the lines of her face, memorizing every still detail. Then it happened, so small, so impossibly slight, that he almost missed it. Her fingers twitched, once, then again. Eliza, he said, barely breathing. The girl was already on her feet. She moved to the edge of the bed, Toby stirring but not waking in her arms. Miles leaned closer. Lena, her eyelids fluttered. A faint crease appeared between her brows. Her lips parted, dry and silent. Her chest rose on a long, uncertain breath. Mom, Eliza whispered. Mom, it's me. And slowly, painfully, miraculously, Lena's eyes opened. It took them a moment to focus, to adjust, but when they did, they found Eliza first, and then, slowly, moved to the man across the bed. Miles, she breathed, so quiet, it could have been a memory spoken aloud. He nodded, blinking back the sudden rush of tears. I'm here. Her eyes slipped closed again for a moment, like even that small effort had taken everything, but when they opened again, there was more light in them, more recognition. You came, she whispered, her voice rough and thin. I never should have left, he said. She looked at Eliza, who was trembling now, caught between a sob and a smile. We missed you, Mama, the girl whispered. We were waiting. Lena didn't speak again, but she squeezed Miles's hand, her grip feather light, and certain. Her gaze moved once more to Eliza, then down to the sleeping weight of Toby against her shoulder, her children, alive, safe. The nurse arrived a moment later, drawn by the movement on the monitors. She gasped quietly and rushed to check vitals, her voice rising with cautious joy as she confirmed what they already knew. She's awake, she said, her smile wide. She's really awake. And for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, the hospital room no longer felt like a place of endings. It felt like a doorway to something new. The days that followed moved with a quiet kind of gravity, as if each hour held something delicate that might break if handled too roughly. Lena remained in the hospital, weak but stable, her recovery uncertain but no longer a question of if, just when. Doctors came and went with careful optimism. Nurses spoke in softer tones when they entered the room. Eliza sat at her mother's side every day, telling her about everything, about the cafe, the hotel, the soft bed and warm socks, about how Miles stayed. about how Toby stopped crying in his sleep. Miles was there too, always nearby, often silent. He didn't try to reclaim the lost years with words. Instead, he brought comfort in other ways. Warm meals, clean clothes, quiet presence, and slowly the children began to treat his nearness as normal, not like something borrowed, but something earned. One evening, Lena was awake enough to hold Eliza's hand for more than a few seconds. Her eyes, still tired but clearer now, flicked toward Miles across the room. "You stayed," she whispered. "I did." She managed a faint smile. "Wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't either," he said, and the honesty of it made her eyes shine. Later, back at the hotel, Eliza sat on the couch with Toby asleep against her side. Miles crouched in front of her, a folder in his hands. "I've filed for guardianship," he said. "Temporary for now, but I want to make it permanent, if that's what you want too." She stared at him, wide-eyed, the weight of his words sinking in slowly. "No one will take us away?" she asked. "No," he said. "No one, not ever." She didn't answer at first. Then she leaned forward and hugged him, quietly, tightly, her arms wrapped around his neck like she had been waiting to exhale for weeks. He closed his eyes and held her back, careful not to wake the boy between them. By the end of the second week, the hotel suite felt less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. They developed routines: cereal in the morning, books before bed, whispered jokes that made Toby giggle into his sister's shoulder. Miles learned how to braid Eliza's hair and how to fold laundry with one hand while holding a sleepy 4-year-old with the other. They were still learning, still adjusting. There were nights when Eliza crept into the living room just to check that he was still there. Mornings when Toby woke crying, calling for a mother who wasn't yet strong enough to come home. But there was also laughter and warmth and beginnings. One morning, as they prepared to leave for the hospital again, Eliza slipped something into Miles's hand. "The bracelet, you should wear it now," she said softly, "so we know you won't forget." He looked at her, so small, so fierce, and nodded. He fastened it around his wrist and didn't take it off. Not that day, not ever. And for the first time in his life, Miles Carter understood what it meant to truly belong.